Very pleasant good afternoon to all of our viewers. We are delighted to have you on Let's Talk this afternoon. It is always a great privilege to be with you to discuss issues. And this afternoon, we are going to be talking about a very important issue, the relevance of the church in today's culture. That is our discussion for this afternoon. And we are just excited to come your way to share on this very important subject. We're going to have a word of prayer, and then we're going to introduce our special guest for this afternoon. We have more than one. Over the past few weeks, we have been having one guest. Well, we have several this afternoon, and we will let you know who they are in a while. But before we do so, we want to invite you to bow here, shall we? Eternal Father and our God, we thank you for the privilege of sharing on Let's Talk, discussing issues relevant to your people and your church. We ask that you will direct the process, guide us in our deliberations, and help that the information presented will prove meaningful. Thank you for hearing and answering. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Amen.
Well, today we have a number of individuals who are going to be sharing. As I indicated earlier, our topic for today is the relevance of the Seventh-day Adventist Church in today's culture. Is the church relevant? Have we lost our relevance? And with us, we have a number of leaders from around the Caribbean. We are going to be introducing these distinguished gentlemen momentarily. In fact, I am going to go one by one. I want to begin with Pastor Kern Tobias. Pastor Tobias, Dr. Kern Tobias, is the president of the Caribbean Union. He is no stranger to Let's Talk. He has been here before. In fact, Dr. Tobias, we did a series, 3 weeks on marriage, divorce, and remarriage, and folks are still talking about that one. So again, we say a very special welcome to you.
Pleasure.
Then we have Pastor Roger Stevens. Pastor Roger Stevens is the president of the St. Lucia Mission of Seventh-day Adventists. Pastor Stevens is resident on the island of St. Lucia, and he serves there as a leader for the church in that region. Pastor Stevens, we are delighted to have you with us. Welcome to Let's Talk.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
All right. Then we have Pastor Tony Mapp. Pastor Tony Mapp is the president of the Tobago Mission, the island of Tobago, Twin Island state of Trinidad and Tobago, but Tobago is a mission in the Seventh Adventist organizational structure here. And Pastor Mapp is the leader there in Tobago. Welcome, Pastor Mapp.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here.
Wonderful. Then we have Pastor Leslie Moses, who is the president of the South Caribbean Conference. That is the sister island to Tobago, Trinidad. We are delighted to have you, Pastor Moses. Welcome to Let's Talk.
My pleasure to be in Antigua today.
Wonderful. And then we have Pastor Robinson Francis. Pastor Robinson Francis, I paused there on that name because, you know, we generally use another name, but Pastor Francis has Antiguan connection. His wife is from Antigua. He is the president of the East Caribbean Conference, the islands of Dominica and Barbados. Pastor Francis, welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Greene. Thanks to I'm happy to be here with you in Antigua and the conference itself, all the other fields, the islands involved.
And then finally, we have this afternoon Pastor Desmond James, no stranger to most of us in South Leeward Conference. Pastor James was, of course, the first president of South Leeward Mission. We are delighted to have you with us, Pastor Desmond James. Pastor James is now serving the North Caribbean Conference, 10 islands, St. Croix, let me put it short, the US Virgin Islands, the British Virgin Islands, Anguilla, and the Dutch territories. Welcome, Pastor James.
Thank you, Dr. Greene. It's good to be back home and to join my illustrious colleagues on this forum this afternoon. Thank you.
Amen, amen. Well, gentlemen, we are so delighted to have all of you on Let's Talk today. And we we are going to be having this important discussion on the relevance of the church in today's culture. That's what we are talking about. There are lots of persons who want to know, what it is about the church. Well, let's begin the discussion. Some persons view the Seventh-day Adventist Church as ancient. They say it has too many rules and too many standards. As such, they claim that it has lost its relevance. I want to begin by asking, why must the church maintain high standards? Why must the church maintain high standards? And any one of you can jump in and answer that question.
Well, the church, by virtue of its very purpose, the church exists by its nature and command for the sake of announcing the good news of salvation to all nations and to make them disciples. So who we are is determined by what we believe, and our foundation is riveted in the Word of God, which states our standards of operation. So they're not changeable by the times and the seasons and the culture. So that's why our mandate and statutes of operation are founded in the Word of God, which is the basis of defining who we are and what we do. So that's why I think our standards will forever remain the same, even though times and culture change.
I will put it another way, saying the same thing, that the church is God's idea. And so he, as the head of the church, has the right to determine what standards we have. It's not man-made. We did not create them. We cannot adjust them. We are getting it from him, and he wants to bring us back to where we were before we lost our relationship with him. So the plan of reconciliation.
So I also believe that there must be a clear line of demarcation between the church and the world. And so if there is no high standard, then there is nothing to differentiate the church from the world. There must be a clear line of demarcation. And so it is by virtue of our standards that this clear line of demarcation can be seen and known by the world.
Now I know Pastor, who was it? The pastor was trying to say something just now.
Tobias.
Yes, but before you jump in there, Pastor Rogers just said, in addition to what Pastor James and Pastor Francis said, that there has to be a demarcation between the church and the world, and the standards are necessary for that. So a little bit more on what the church is. What really is the purpose of the church?
Of course, if I can say, Dr. Greene, we are called out. The very word ecclesia, translated from kahal, we are called out. And the purpose for which we are called out, we are given a specific objective, and that is to proclaim the good news of salvation, to bring persons into a relationship, those who have not yet known or accepted Christ, for the salvation of the world. And so if we don't maintain this standard, I don't see how the church would have the authority to stand and make a difference to those persons who have not yet known the Lord.
Yes, I was about to share Peter's perspective, as to the need for high standards when he said in 1 Peter 2:9, but ye are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, and holy nation, a peculiar people, that you should show forth the praises of him who hath called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. So standards are critical if the differentiation between darkness and light would be observed and respected and regarded.
Can I chip in?
Moses, I'm interested in what you were going to say.
Yeah, can I chip in a little bit to say standards and rules are the order of every system. So even those individuals who talk about too many standards or standards too high, they themselves have rules and standards that they follow.
Yeah.
If we were to take what happened in Washington a few days ago as an example, at one point in time, we thought that there were no rules, there were no standards, to govern the people in terms of how they should behave. And of course, some people, I suppose, didn't do what they had to do. So things just got out of hand. Could you imagine what would have happened if there were no protocols, no standards, no rules in regard to how the Capitol building was supposed to be treated? That building would have been destroyed. So standards and rules are not to hurt us, I would think, and I would say. High standards and high rules only help to maintain order and decorum and peace, if you will, in any system that exists.
And Dr. Greene, I dare say also that the standards of the world were given to the world by the church, and they frame our behavior and lifestyle to a large extent.
That's interesting, Pastor James. The standards of the world were given to the world by the church. Break that down a little bit for me.
Okay, let's look at our our governmental laws. Our governmental laws were given to us from the Ten Commandments. So look at every law that governs society. Where did they come from? The church, I dare say. Now, what we have now is that, and you talk about it, I guess you're going to bring it up, postmodern culture that is challenging the fundamental laws that were once the framework and foundation of society. But thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not kill, and so on. Where they came from? The Bible.
Okay, I got you. I just wanted to make sure that our viewers were following you. All right, wonderful. Well, gentlemen, let me, Pastor James did mention the issue of postmodernism, but before we go there, give us a sense of how people in your country view the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Let's start with Pastor Mapp. Pastor Mapp, we haven't heard from you yet. How do people in Tobago view the church, the Seventh-day Adventist Church?
In very, very high regard. Very high regard across the community. They respect the church. They know what the church is capable of. They're amazed at how quickly we could get some things done. They're also amazed at how we are able to mobilize quickly. For example, when about a year ago or so, when we had the situation with the Venezuelans, was the church, the Seventh-day Adventist Church, that rose to the occasion to ensure that they were cared for, fed, transported, to get baths and those kind of stuff, so that they. And just today, I visited a church that the neighbor of the church, for example, who is an Anglican, the member would go on Sabbath and Friday afternoon, open the church. The neighbor who is an Anglican will go in the church and decorate the church and make sure that there are flowers and everything for the church. And then the member would come back and lock up the church at sunset. You know, it is just an example of the kind of way the church is viewed by a number of people in the community. And this is not to say everybody sees the church like that. But I think based on the work we do and the humanitarian work we seek to do as a church, the church is well respected in the Tobago mission. And I trust in many fields it might be similar.
Okay, thank you, Pastor Moses. Gentlemen, anybody else wants to pitch in there? How is the view of
well, I would say in my territory, we have a high influence, great respect. Our program as a church, what we believe and the high standards for which we stand, that gets a high degree of respect. How we perform, we have great humanitarian program. The government looks to us in collaboration because of our well-organized system. Our educational institutions continue to deliver good education to the community, our boys and girls, our young people. And so there's a deep, high respect for who we are as Adventists because of what we do and how we mingle in our community.
So in spite of, and just a minute, Pastor Francis, in spite of the complaints we get now and then from even some members of the church about the standards, there is a general level of appreciation and respect for what the church stands for.
Certainly, the church is respected primarily for its moral standing in the community, how we live, how we behave, how we contribute to the development of the society. Many Seventh-day Adventists you find in all sectors of the economy of Barbados and Dominica. So then the programs we run on television and radio, the schools, the impact that our schools have, these are making significant contributions, apart from what all the others said, the humanitarian work. And so people respect the church. Our health program is very strong. Even we were able to lead, as it were, in talking about your immune system in this area of pandemic. And so the church is very well respected in Barbados and the Dominica. We are the second largest denomination in Barbados. So we have to play that role, and we also conduct our civic duties. So they realize that we are not separated from the community. We are mingling, we are part of the community, and we are contributing to its development.
So what I hear you gentlemen saying is that in as much as we maintain high standards and preach the gospel, we also have a humanitarian arm. We care for and support governments and try to promote good citizenship. That's wonderful. Well, why then do we find the challenge with people asking about relevance of the church? We live in a postmodern culture. Pastor James hinted to that earlier on. This matter of post-modernity. My question is there a tension between post-modernity and Christianity?
Definitely there is. Post-modernity foundational tenet is that everything is relative. That's and right. So that will challenge a church whose belief is that we have absolute truth. So they don't believe there's absolute truth, whereas the church, the Seventh Adventist Church, believes Jesus. He says, I'm the way, the truth, and the light. So in God, we have absolute truth. And on the other hand, post-modernity says there's nothing absolute, everything is relative. And this percolates into society where everybody's belief, whatever you do, I can't judge you based on who I am and where I'm from. So if I'm from this culture, you can't judge me because my behavior in this culture, etc. So there is a tension.
And they say further too, Pastor James, that their truth, each person's truth is truth. Correct. So that you don't have any authentic or absolute truth. Right. Everybody believes that they can do what is right in their eyes. And this obviously will cause a tremendous challenge to the church, who is being led by Christ, and Christ has not changed.
And also the church, postmodernism is anti-authority. Okay. And so the voice of the church is an authoritative voice, because we are not just echoing our sentiments, we are speaking for God. Exactly. And there has to be that clarion certain call on behalf of God as to all that he expects of his people.
Right. Now I was about saying, before Dr. Tobias commented there, that we do get clearly from you all the distinction between postmodernity, what it stands for, what it pushes, and where the church stands. We, for example, believe that the Bible is the final authority, and authority is a big issue there. But we do have people, particularly the younger generation, who are caught in this pull of post-modernity, and there's so many, especially in a culture that is becoming less Christian. You know, our world, many people say, is becoming smaller, not physically smaller, but people have more exposure. The internet is all over, and people are being influenced by other ideologies. So my question is, how do we counter the pull of postmodernity?
And I begin to suggest that the counter strategy for the church must be what Gary Swanson calls meaning makers. The world that we live in is information saturated. You alluded to that, Dr. Greene. We have the internet. We have more information now than we ever had before. Persons would go to the doctor before the doctor would give a diagnosis, give medication, the person would go, take it, live or die. Today, you get medication, you get a diagnosis, you go on the internet, and it happens in every sphere of life. And because of the vast amount of information, people are asking questions. And even though information is available, there is still some bits of information that they are not getting clearly. For example, what is the true meaning of life? What is the purpose of life? What happens after this life? And Gary Swanson makes the point that in this age, we must be meaning makers. We must use our Bibles. We must use our church to give meaning to all of these questions that post-modernity and the information barrage is not able to address and to answer. So I'm saying that is one of the ways, that could be one of the ways to deal with the issue of how to counter the matter of post-modernity.
I also believe that the church must create the avenues, the forums, open and objective discussions, especially as it relates to our youth. Most of our young people now, of course, bordering on post-modernity, but they don't usually get the forums, the avenues to ask the relevant questions and get the relevant answers from those persons they can trust. So one, there needs to be avenue, and two, I believe a relationship with those persons, especially the younger generation, relationship with them is going to play a very pertinent role.
And Dr. Greene, I think there's some common grounds if we're going to engage our young people. Young people in modernity, there's an emphasis, there's a hunger for community. That's one of the characteristics. And there's also a hunger for authenticity. Mm-hmm. So instead of a lot of preaching, we got to put our mission into action. Instead of preaching apologetics, we must be unapologetic, demonstrate in our community, and that will be a connecting point to engage them, because you can't, if you go to engage them on opinion, they already said, look, religion is reduced to everybody's opinion. My opinion is right, your opinion is right. So we ought to engage them on common ground. They have a passion to see things done in community, and there's a passion for authenticity. They want to be real. If we go in there and we don't demonstrate what we preach, then they're turned off. So I think we can rediscover our mission of being a church in the world, because that's where our mission is. We are sent to the world with the good news to impact men and women in a rather practical way.
I want to add to that. This is a serious challenge to the church, and as Pastor James just said, I think White puts it so beautifully. She said, one well-ordered, well-disciplined family tells more in behalf of Christianity than all the sermons that can be preached. The religion of Christ, she further continues in the same book, Adventist Home, is to be interwoven with all that we do and say. God desires his people to show by their lives the advantage of Christianity over worldliness. And that is the point where authenticity, lack of duplicity and hypocrisy must be demonstrated by us as individual Christians.
Right.
And that will convince them. It's not logic now, because we don't really have a document that could say we believe this together, because they don't accept our core document as authentic. So they have to see it in us.
Well, Pastor James raised an issue there just now, an issue about relevance, and that's what we're discussing. I mean, he didn't quite use that word, but that's what we're discussing. In terms of reaching people and being meaningful. I guess the question is the church really fulfilling its responsibility in a meaningful way? Are we scratching where it's itching? So let me ask in other words, as we discuss this matter of relevance, is there, I mean, what do people want from the church versus what the church offers? That's the question. Are we satisfying needs in a meaningful way?
If I may jump in at this point, okay.
Right, Pastor Mapp.
The church has and offers the issue of honesty and the issue of rules and doctrine, sorry, and the issue of the church offers to the people the sense of truth to be lived out in their daily lives and so on. But I think while we do that, and we shouldn't stop that, what the people need from the church more than anything is now, perhaps in addition to the doctrines and in addition to the rules and regulations that the church operates with, is honesty and integrity and character, authenticity, as was pointed out before. We have to spend time with the people. We have to leave the walls of the building and go out to them, as it were, like I said to myself, lime on the block, as it were, spend a little time, stand up and talk with the guys on the street, because they would not necessarily come to the place where we are offering all of these things that they need. And so the church has to leave the place where it finds itself in worship and go out and reach the people more in a not to give them doctrinal stuff, but more in a way to be present with them, to feel with them, to converse with them. And out of that experience, they would want to trust you more. They would want to be they might even come to your place more because of what you're seeking to do. So the church relevance is connected to its listening to what God says when he says, go, not wait for them to come, but go. That's what I want to just put here.
Dr. Greene, I think in a real way, society is looking to us to satisfy a lot of social needs. And in a sense, our response will morph and change according to the culture and the time. Let me give you an example. For example, welfare aid once ago was just giving out a food basket. Let me show you in my territory, in terms of the pandemic, it has rendered a lot of people homeless. And you're talking about people who had a job, not necessarily bums on the street, but they don't have a job now. And so they can't meet their commitment, their rental commitment. So in terms of satisfying, if we're going to mingle and meet needs, which is one of our foundational tenets of engaging society, those needs are going to change. So instead of just giving a food basket now, you may have to look towards providing money to give people so that they can pay their rent and so on. So in a large respect, society is looking more. In my generation, when I was growing up, it wasn't looming as large as that. But society now looks towards the church in a rather real way to satisfy their social inadequacies.
Now, Pastor James and everybody else, this is an interesting observation you're making, but there is also a tension that is created here, because there are lots of persons who think that the church has an obligation to satisfy their economic, their social needs accordingly. You mentioned the pandemic, which has hit all of us hard, including the church.
Right.
There are some who see the church as a social organization, responding to physical needs, humanitarian needs, and don't care much about the spiritual dimension. How do we balance that?
That's the point I wanted to make, Dr. Greene, that while it is true that we do have an obligation to help, the church is really not simply a humanitarian agency. It is about salvation. And that it will always come first. Even when Jesus healed people, even a person was blind and a person was sick, and he said, "Thy sins be forgiven thee," to show you where the center of Christianity is all about. It's about a larger picture than just the physical and social needs that present themselves to you. However, these needs give us a conduit to get to people, and we should do them to the extent that we can. And then I think we also need to emphasize the role of the individual member rather than the corporate body in responding to some of these needs. What I see.
I should also add. I should also add that very often we assume whilst there are general needs and depending on the social situation, needs are very relevant. But the church also has to assume a posture that we are going to try to discover people's felt needs, and people must be able to say what their needs are. There is a role for the church to seek to discover from those who we hope to serve and save what their felt needs are. I think we can do a little more of that in many of our activities. Yeah.
And I agree with you, Dr. Tobias, because, and it's just not, okay, even coming out of this pandemic, what it has brought about, even though we know the church doesn't have all the resources to meet the multiplied needs, but we can become agents in pointing them towards those felt needs. I agree with you. For example, mental disorder is an outgrowth of this pandemic.
Correct.
And so we should be able to say, okay, here we don't have the money, silver and gold have I none, but we can become agents in pointing them and creating avenues where these needs can be met. Because if we don't meet needs, we can't engage them with the gospel. If a man is hungry, if a man is mentally deranged and he's disturbed, for you to get the gospel to him, you got to meet his felt needs. So I agree with you, Dr. Tobias.
And I think we can capture this in empathy, because I believe even persons are aware that the church can't provide all of the social needs. But if they can get to the point where they can see that the church cares, the church empathizes with them, I think it's going to create a greater relationship with the church, so that even when we bring the gospel to them, it can be readily accepted. I think the church needs to be more empathetic at this point, especially now. When you think of emotional care, when you think of all the depression that people are going through, we may not be able to, assist in every way, but we can link them. We can have persons from our different congregations to help them with these social and immediate needs.
Well, gentlemen, our time is just about halfway through, and I know the discussion is very interesting, but we're going to take a question from our viewers. Our viewers are beginning to send in some questions, and this question asks: are the leaders of the church, you are the leaders in your respective territories, are the leaders of the church aware of the relevant issues in the world today? And are we planning yearly and daily with these needs in mind? That's the question that someone has posited.
And to give a quick answer, we would say yes. We do not live, as hermits. We are a part of the society. We are a part of the culture. And in many places, we do surveys and empirical research to find out what people are thinking, what people are saying, what people are asking for. So generally, if I can speak for my colleagues, I would say yes to that question. Just to go one step further and to say we are able all the time to reach all those who need whatever they need and to address all of the issues would be to say, no, we are not able always to do it for many reasons. But generally speaking, I think if I can speak for myself and the others, we are aware of the issues that members are facing, the issues the wider community is facing. We have some answers, we don't have some answers. We are working on some, we are not working on some. But the fact is we are making progress in some areas.
Okay, well, again, we are talking about...
I think there's also a need to recognize that it is the church. Who is the church? And it's not just the leadership of the church. Every single member, and there are members who would see things that we as leaders may not see. And it's very critical for those members to know that they also have responsibility to join with leaders, sometimes even to just join by informing leadership and to bring in answers sometimes when they see the situation, because some of our members are working in places where they know that there are grants available for certain things, and to help guide us towards those things so that we can be in a much better place to give the kind of assistance that is needed. So understanding who is the church and seeing all of us as leaders within this church, seeing those needs and finding ways to meet them for the kingdom's sake.
I mean, you're raising a very important principle there, Pastor Mapp, especially in this period of crisis that we're experiencing now, brought on by the pandemic, of course, where when we understand that the church is not the building, but the individuals. So as an individual member of the church, when I utilize the skills that I have to provide comfort and psychological support to somebody else, that is the church doing that. That's important. But I want to turn corners a little bit, because so far, you've all given a very glowing picture of the church. I want to ask a hard question now. I think you would all agree that the church is not perfect. As a leader, do you sometimes wish that you could do things differently? And if you had the opportunity to change one thing about the church, what would it be? What if you had an opportunity to change one thing about the church, what would it be? Who wants to begin this one now? Maybe I should ask the union president to start. I don't know.
Well, this is a very insightful question, I have to say. As far as doctrines are concerned, I think the church is doing quite well doctrinally. But if I were to change one thing about the church, I would want to change the legalistic orientation that has been a bugbear for our church. Where we have difficulty to accept unconditionally and to love unconditionally people with difference, maybe a different religion, a different orientation.
Mm-hmm.
That for me is a major challenge for my church. And I struggle with it. As coming from a very conservative culture. For those of you who may not have known, I grew up in the same place that Pastor Mapp is now pastoring, that beautiful little island of Tobago, and Adventism is very strong, and it is streamlined, and it is structured, and we think a certain way that Adventist is it, and Adventist is the best, So that's one of the things that I want to change for my church, that we can be open in relation to loving people as Christ did, without judging. That judging attitude sometimes we have. Yeah.
If I may,
my president. Sorry.
If I may go second,
Yeah.
Dr. Greene,
Sure.
I would say that thing I would want to change about the church is the caring of the church. Sometimes in the past, the church, again, being so legalistic, as Dr. Tobias referred it to, saw leaders as infallible. And so if a child or a woman, a wife, a spouse said that the elder or the pastor is abusive, we would sweep it under the carpet. Sometimes we transfer, abusive persons, and sometimes they themselves as leaders, lay leaders, transfer themselves from one place to the next, and they go with a trail and create a trail of abuse. And sometimes the church, sometimes in the past, the church wasn't as caring and as careful as it should have been to reach out and to protect the vulnerable. That one thing I would want to change, and I'm seeking to change it where I operate, that caring attitude that we avoid of sometimes.
Building on that same point of both my president and Pastor Moses, the one thing I think I would like to change is that we could come to a place where we can affirm the various talents of the various members, so that all the talents would be brought to the table, and we would stop putting round pegs in square holes.
One of the things I would want to, if I could, is the bystander mindset. I think just about too much of a large percentage of our members are just bystanders. and are depending or relying on just a few, especially the leaders. They don't see themselves as agents of change within the various congregation and the corporate body of Christ. And so there is just this bystander mindset. I can only stand and allow this person to do, and the pastor to do, and the elders to do, but I'm absolved of everything. This I would wish to change.
If I had the opportunity to change, I think as a church, we have beautiful structures and models, but I think we are slow. The wheels of change in our church take long to change. As we live in the world, as we look at the cosmetic changes in terms of impacting culture, it's moving faster in each succeeding generation. And in order for us to adapt structures to effectively meet those needs, I wish we could do it a whole lot faster than we're doing it right now.
If I had to put my 2 cents in on this one, I would want to look at the church from a little different angle. And I would want to change that a little more of the monies remain with local fields because of the needs on the ground that we have to attend to. And if we were to attend to those needs because we have a little more monies to meet those needs, I have a feeling that the people, both in and out of the church, will have a greater sense of satisfaction that things have been met for them. And they're likely more to even join the church and come around the church and perhaps make greater contributions. Even people who never joined the church might make greater contributions to the church because they're seeing so much more is being done, and we can do it for the long haul. One of the challenges of the church is that we cannot we're afraid to become too engaged, because to become engaged is because we have to do it for the long haul. We could do the overnight thing, but to do it forever is going to create a challenge for us. And part of it is we don't have the resources to do it. And so that would be one of the things I would want to change. If we could get a little more money to remain with the local field, it might help in that regard. So that's the perspective of the church I want to just jot in here.
Now it's interesting to hear the varying perspectives of how you would want to see things done differently. I asked the question to church leaders because it is important for us to appreciate the fact that in as much as it is God's church, that there are still issues, and we admit that the church is not perfect and they're still evolving. Right. But I want to go back a minute to what Dr. Tobias said in his response. You know, this matter of the grace dimension versus the law dimension. Now, Dr. Tobias, when you spoke, my thoughts were that you were speaking from a perspective of the mentality of the people, because in reality, the church is very clear on the grace dimension, but we do have a challenge sometimes where some of our members tend to hold on to, you know, an orientation, unfortunately, that is skewed towards a legalistic approach. But it's interesting to hear the different dimensions there. At this time, I want to take another question from our viewers. I'm watching the time because, you know, as I said earlier, time goes by very, very quickly. And so that's just, in as much as that's an important discussion and one that we would want to spend some more time on. But let's hear this question. This person is asking, how can the church meet needs when the church itself is struggling? Interesting question.
If I may jump into that one, or somebody was before. Go ahead, Pastor. Dr.
I was just saying we're all wounded healers.
That's right.
We're all wounded healers. We're people suffering, and we have to pray for people having similar situations. And the church in the world is no different. We have our limitations, but we still see needs, and we have to meet them.
Okay, wonderful. Wonderful. And
this is where I was going to add what Pastor Mapp said just now. I was going to present another side of that argument, that we have to be careful that the church is not seeing itself as a congregational church, as opposed to a world church where we pull together to do more rather than going individually. And so the system that we work on right now gives us that possibility to do much more because we are pooling rather than each person on its own. And I think part of the challenge we have here, why the church is not doing more, is because our members are not giving more. If they give more, I think we could do more because the will is there, but the resources are not there.
Well, a follow-up question, interestingly from the same person, is how can the church empower people in the church to be in a better position to meet needs, spiritual, social, economic, etc.? I like this question because who was it? Was it Pastor Mapp that says the church really is not just the structure, but the people? So the person is asking about how do we empower people to position themselves? And
let me say, Pastor Greene, what you are doing on this program, Let's Talk, is part of the process. I would have thought of empowering people. We are educating them, we are giving them skills, understanding, and then we're also helping people in our churches to recognize their giftedness and how they can use their giftedness to help others and to strengthen others. So this is all part of it. It's not just one activity. The preaching, the services that we have, the programs that we have through the various departments are all designed to help to empower the members so that the members can be more active in helping, and the church totally then would be in a better position to help the community in all levels, at all levels.
No, Dr. Greene, somebody spoke earlier about square pegs and round holes. I think it was Dr. Francis. And one of the things the church must come to grips with is using its gifts and the persons who are gifted to help those who are not. We talked earlier about the church and its welfare ministry. Pastor Desmond James talked about that as well. And the thought came to me, somebody said it many years ago, it's better to teach somebody to fish than to be giving them a fish. That's not the exact quote, but essentially that's what I was saying. There are so many gifted persons in our church. If our church members and the leaders of our churches, including the leaders at this level, just sit back and say, you know, there are needs here, let's just supply the needs, instead of empowering the people, training them and retraining them, even in a pandemic, then there would be more suffering. So the church has to come to that realization that it is not just about giving a food basket or giving some dollars for rent. It is about helping an individual through the many MBA persons we have in our churches, through the teachers, through literacy training, through agriculture, through trade, teaching people trade. They are members of our church who are specialists at these things. We must now come to the fore and say to members who are suffering, starving, destitute, come, let's do this. Let me teach you how to do it and show you how to catch that fish.
For example, Dr.
And I concur with you, Elder Moses. I mean, in our conference, I was happy to see that Adjure did a program called Adjure Bag, where they gave a food basket with food, but they also put in their seeds so that they can equip the people who are suffering, not only to get food for the immediate, but to plant a garden so that you may become sustainable and alleviate yourself from poverty. And I think that is what we have to enlarge our modus operandi and our strategic agenda to involve this in our training, not just teaching somebody how to do a Bible study, but it must be equally important to teach somebody how to maintain their livelihood, so that when challenges like these come upon us, we're well equipped to withstand the impact.
If I were to share, you know, just to quickly share a success story, as Pastor James talked about the gardening, you know, the women's ministries of the Caribbean Union, Sister Debbie Henry had this training organized for farming, and to hear sisters excitedly saying about the gardens that they are now planting. So it's possible. It's possible.
Yes, it is possible.
Yeah, and I was saying, Dr. Greene, we have actually done this. We have many skilled persons in the area of agriculture who have worked at the highest level with the government. We have voted last year an agriculture committee, and they have put the terms of reference together that would be actually helping persons around the island. Those who are in farming, those who are interested in farming, the mission has land. And we have voted to allow these lands to be used for persons who may be interested but don't have the land. And so I believe there are so many different ways we can empower our people.
Yeah.
Especially
Wonderful. Right in our South Leeward conference, we do have a youth farm, just as an example. And I don't have time to go into some of the exciting things that are on the horizon. But another question, we're going to try to push in 2 or 3 more questions here quickly. There is another element that I really wanted to discuss, but gentlemen, I'm going to put you on notice now. We're going to come back another time and we're just going to deal with this matter. So I'm going to leave the issue of worship style for a separate discussion altogether, and go ahead and accept your kind graces in saying that you will be back for us to discuss that element of worship styles. But here is a very interesting question. With the COVID situation, we have seen how harvest reaping online ministry is. I suppose the impact of doing online ministry. The question is, are we going to return to preaching to ourselves? That's the question, and I want somebody to respond to that.
I don't know if we will want to return to preaching to ourselves. I think we will continue on both the platforms, both in person and virtual. We will meet one group of people virtually, on the in-person platform, and we will meet another group of people on the virtual platform. But I think the church has a responsibility to look for all its members at this present time. We need a ministry where the deacons and the deaconesses, the pastors, Sabbath school teachers are visiting, both physical and where it is not physical by electronic means, so that we can garner and keep together all the sheep and the lambs that belong to the flock.
Pastor, Dr. Greene, we at the South Caribbean Conference, the church in Trinidad, we have already decided we're not going back, to answer your question. And not going back would be to suggest we're not going solely to preach to ourselves. It's interesting, one of our young pastors, an intern, had a crusade in Stanmore Avenue, Dr. Greene. Pastor Amguli, I think is his name. He had a crusade, nobody got baptized, nobody accepted, but somebody in St. Croix. The person was looking on from St. Croix. And he was able to reach out, Pastor James, Desmond James, to one of your pastors in St. Croix, and say to that individual, this person followed me in this crusade throughout and wants to give her heart to the Lord. So we're not going back, Dr. Greene. We will maintain our presence on the platform. We have already spoken to our pastors, get the equipment. And even in a post-COVID environment, we will do like most churches in North America and Europe have been doing. We will continue to stay on these platforms to let the world know that Jesus is coming again. And by the way,
I think it's one of the benefits of COVID, if you may say something positive coming out of it, because what we are doing right here, for example, one of you in Trinidad, one in Tobago, one in St. Croix and Barbados and that kind of thing. But we're able to connect and we're able to reach an audience around the world. So that's a tremendous benefit. And I'm happy that the church, which incidentally has not been too far behind, outside of the Caribbean, the church at the higher levels, at John Conference, we have Hope TV, we have lots of media ministry. Adventist World Radio is using social media to a significant degree. It is a marvelous church that we do have. But I want to ask another question. We were discussing earlier the matter of the when I did ask about what you could change about the church, and here is an interesting question that somebody's asking. I lost it. Let me see if I find it. Just let me go to this one. I lost the question. I'm sorry. I'll get it in a minute. But if I may, okay.
Why you look for the question, Doc? This COVID has exposed some challenges for the church, but it has also exposed a lot of possibilities. And we are talking about relevance. It would be foolhardy if the church never embraces this opportunity and be relevant so that you can reach a wider congregation and you can do a whole lot more. In all my Zoom meetings, I get a 100% attendance. In the physical meetings, you don't have that privilege. So we're speaking about relevance, and we can, if we ever go back to the same old thing, then we will become archaic, outmoded.
And then
very true.
The Caribbean Union Impact Carew is also an example of how we're going to use the virtual platform to reach the millions across the Caribbean, you know. So this is where we are, and I guess we are also moving to use the cell phone platform, which is even more prevalent than
it's less expensive.
Exactly, less expensive. Yeah.
Very true. Very true. Now, gentlemen, we as I look at the time, we only have time for one last question. So I'm going to ask this one. I wanted to ask two, but I'm going to ask this one. Again, coming out of the discussions we had with what you would want to change about the church, and I believe this is in response to, I don't remember who it was. I think it was Pastor James who said, you know, the wheels of change are slow. But the question here is, somebody did say something about the legalistic element. I think that was Dr. Tobias. Why does our church take such a legalistic posture, and what role does the leaders play in establishing this posture? What can our leaders do at this stage to reduce or dispel this posture? Interesting question.
I missed the first part of the question.
Why does the church take such a legalistic posture? Now, I did explain that it is not the official stance of the church. We are a church of grace, but many of our members are tied into this legalistic framework. So I think the person is asking, how can we get people away from there to what we really, really teach?
Well, the pulpit has to be used. Yes. The pulpit has to be used, you know, to highlight the grace aspects, you know, and not just sermonizing now, but application, practical messages. And sometimes we have to make ourselves vulnerable. We have to make ourselves vulnerable to show members that we have had struggles to be grace-filled and to be grace agents as well, you know. But the pulpit has to be used significantly.
Very well.
We have to also go with understand the value of the small group. You see, the board members need to begin to catch a vision of what a church that is service-oriented would look like. If this church had to survive purely on the basis of its loving people, then what would you do differently? And I think we have to begin to get our church to see itself as a church that will die if it is not loving, if it is not kind, if it doesn't treat people a certain way. Because if this was a business we were running, we would not run it that way. We will not run it so that we could run people away. We'll run it in a fashion where people would always want to come to us. That is what the church picture has to be in their minds. The pastor and every leader must begin to model that. And so members could feel it, first of all.
Right.
And they will tell people the place to be is at our church. And
well, thank you very much, gentlemen. Unfortunately, our time is up. We have to stop at this time, but I have your commitment that we will come again, perhaps sometime in February, maybe. I'm suggesting. In the meantime, I want to remind our viewers that next week we have another very interesting discussion coming up. In fact, let me tell you what's happening in the next 2 weeks. Next week we're going to be talking about religious liberty. We have a panel of distinguished attorneys along with our religious liberty leader from the Caribbean Union, and we're going to be discussing matters of religious liberty as relates to work issues and constitutional rights, etc. Then the following week, we are going to be talking about the COVID-19 vaccine. Should Adventists be concerned? That's our topic for the 23rd.
Thank you very much.
So, you're being rather relevant.
I try. But again, gentlemen, we are so very grateful for your time this afternoon.
Thank you too.
You know, many of us have appointments at 4 o'clock, so we have to stop now. It was indeed a real blessing having you, and I want to thank you for taking time from your very busy schedule to share with us. God bless you all. Until next time, do.
God bless you.
Thank
As
you
well.
for the opportunity.
Bye-bye.
Thank
Good to
you.
be here.
God bless all those who've been listening.
Success.
Thank you so